good, Tom? That's pretty good. All right, I think we're good with.
I'm Ann Golding. It's my privilege this year to serve as the chairperson for Faith and Grief Ministries. I also serve as a PRN chaplain at a local large hospital.
I'm Caesar Renty. I work for one of the major healthcare systems in our area. I serve as the leader of our spiritual care department at that system, and also have the wonderful opportunity of serving on the board for Faith and Grief. So my experience during the pandemic, both personal and professional, has, well, for me personally, there was this first rush of anxiety. Obviously, there's not a lot known about the virus itself. You're hearing lots of information that comes out, and it produces a lot of anxiety, not only in myself, but also in our staff. And so my personal experience began with, trying to get as much information as I possibly could on the virus and its impact on us. So that was my original first response to the virus. I think as I worked in the hospital, and then my role working as a leader in my department and overseeing a lot of the emotional and spiritual care of our patients and our staff, my concern became even more deeper for the emotional support of our patients, because when we went to sheltering in place, our patients were more isolated. They were isolated in a place when they were sick and at a critical time in their lives when they needed emotional support from their family and friends. And most of the healthcare institutions were keeping people out of the hospital, limiting the number of visitors patients could have. And I knew that that was producing a lot more stress for the patient. And so there was concern there in how to make sure that you were able to connect patients and families for each other. Probably one of the difficult things about this is if someone is dying, how do, in this most sacred moment in a person's life, keep them connected to their family? And that was a concern for me. The other concern was what this would do in terms of staff. Healthcare workers, doctors and nurses come to healthcare to make people better and to really help people. And a lot of the way we had to operate really produced a lot more stress. So if someone was in isolation and they were dying, usually the people that were there was the nurse and the doctor who didn't know their most intimate story and didn't have the most intimate relationship with that patient. That produced a lot of grief and stress for our staff. And we slowly started to hear those stories, how difficult it was to bear witness to the passing of a patient and having a family watch that or be a part of that through an iPad because they couldn't be in the room, or having them present on the phone saying their goodbyes. And so as a chaplain who really sat with people and worked with people during this time, those are the things that I thought about, and that's where I saw the stress on our staff as those numbers rose, and as the number of deaths continue to rise in the number of people that continue to get sick and come into the hospital needing full life support. All of those things, I think, produced a lot of stress on staff, on families, and then staff, they're dealing with their own personal traumas and tragedies. Our staff being exposed to the COVID-19 virus, some infected, some died. And those staff members that died had close relationships with people that they had worked with for years and years and years. And to lose someone in this work that you do and trying to help and being exposed to a virus, I think produced a lot of grief for our staff. And so that, I think, just continues to permeate throughout our organization. And while we had a little bit of a respite when people started getting vaccines, now that those numbers are rising again, it's almost as if we're experiencing some post-traumatic stress around this. And so it's, how do we gear up and do what we're called to do, be present, give the help that we can, all while taking care of ourselves. Some folks have decided to just drop out, and I completely understand that, for their own personal safety, maybe the safety of their family, for whatever reason they've decided to do. I completely understand that. And some people have chosen to stay for a number of reasons. Some folks have, financial obligations that they can't just give up a job and just decide to go do something else. And so they remain doing a job and doing this work. And I think for the reasons that they got into it, they wanted to do this. No one expected that they would be providing health care in the middle of a pandemic, and then watching the numbers rise again, I think has produced a lot of stress, a lot of grief, and reminding people of their own personal losses that they had.
I'm going to agree with everything you just said, Caesar. The first thing I did notice was the anxiety. And I'm going to say first, this is first time around when COVID first came, just borderline fear, because there was not any protection. There was no vaccine. All you had was your PPE, and you were doing everything, staff was doing everything they knew to do to protect themselves. But as you say, some still did get sick. It was very hard on our staff, and I will agree with this point too, to watch people at end of life die with no family members present. At that point, the medical team, specifically nurses, had to be the family. And this would not just happen once a day. They might lose multiple patients in a day. We do have this lovely technology called Blue Jeans, where we can put the family on the big screen TV in the room. The patient would not be responsive in most cases, but the family was able to be there through video, which is a little something, but it's not the same. We had a lot of angry family members because they couldn't get in, which produced a lot more stress on, certainly from the top down at the hospital. And staff needed those family members there. Staff, it was very hard on them to be the nurse and the family. This time around, we have just come out with a new COVID visitor policy that in certain situations at end of life, family can come in. They'll have to go through a little bit of training on what all is required in order to enter the room. I think that is a more humane way.
Yeah.
But now we have the vaccine,
Mm-hmm.
so that family member should be protected. I feel like this second wave, as you just mentioned, has hit.
Mm-hmm.
Our numbers increased by about 10 patients each week. At the highest, our peak was last February. We had 119, 120 COVID patients. We had gotten down to 0.
Mm-hmm.
And today it's 68.
Yeah.
And the thing that's been so hard on our staff is that this was preventable.
Yeah. And I think that's the part that produces a lot of sadness. That sadness may get expressed in anger, but I do know that that anger is tied to hurt, sadness, and what people are feeling. I was just thinking about a lament when it's really the story of the disciples when they're in the middle of a storm, and they're getting rocked in this boat, and Jesus is in the story is in the bottom of the boat asleep, right? And the disciples go down, and there's this passage that says, "Do you care that we perish?" and it's an interesting question, to me, a lamenting question that's presented to Jesus. And of course, Jesus responds to it by coming up and calming the seas. To me, I think a lot of our healthcare workers are saying that. Do you care that we perish? And dying, we can die many different types of deaths. And when we die those deaths, I think it means that we have to take time for mourning. And I think that when we get past the pandemic, there will be this time that we will have to mourn, and that we will need to take time to mourn. And I think that part of that mourning will be lamenting. And I think we're starting to feel that and see that and hear that. As a chaplain, people would call it different things in a clinical setting. But as a chaplain who speaks spiritual language, and really want to hold true to what it is that we do as chaplains and how we allow for opportunities to be able to let our connection to God be heard, the meaning that we tie around all those things. Lamenting is going to be important to our recovery through this process. If we don't lament, then we won't embrace our own humanity.
And it's unresolved grief.
Right.
And I feel like, and I would like to hear your thoughts here, Caesar, there's been grief on every level.
Oh, yes.
Not just death. The first thing we lost was normal.
Yes.
We lost community.
Yeah, yes.
We lost friends. Some lost friends over the division.
Yes.
A virus has caused.
Families struggling.
Yes. Families have struggled. There's grief on several levels here. What are your thoughts there?
I was thinking of the concept of ambiguous loss. We've heard that concept and this work that was done around family members who had a member who struggled with Alzheimer's, or a person who had been lost or missing in war, and didn't come home, and while they had that person there, didn't have a way to close that part of their life, it produced a lot of ambiguous loss for them. It was just a lot of, I'm what I have, but I don't have. And I think that's the part that I see also with our staff. And I think it produces a lot of, I think the ambiguous loss itself produces a lot of stress, because it causes you to ask a whole bunch of questions. You're asking, and then a lot of stuff doesn't make sense, and you're wanting to bring closure to a lot of things, but you can't bring closure to it.
Closure is not a concept that a lot of people will actually embrace, and closure a lot of times just isn't possible.
Right.
And we're hearing questions now that have no answers.
Right.
What we do as chaplains in the COVID situation is just like any other, is just come alongside people.
Right.
And just with our presence, we are sharing their anxiety. We are there to help absorb some of that grief.
Yeah.
Certainly, we have no answers.
Yeah.
But our presence is a very large part of our ministry as chaplains. That's one thing we do. I feel like we do a good job at our hospital of supporting our staff through all the loss, through all the anxiety, through their anger, through their frustration. We just do all we can to support staff, and then families over the phone. We have a chaplain who calls COVID families every day just to give them a report.
Yeah, I think walking along our staff during this time has probably been some of the most important work that we've done.
I agree.
As chaplains, because they're literally on the front lines, day to day, supporting and taking care of patients in their most vulnerable state. And doing this, and I know that there are a lot of nurses that are doing this because they really care about people. And they're doing this with kind of the whole thought that the virus itself can be prevented with a vaccine.
And they're more confident now.
Yes, and with following, just following the guidelines and all of those things.
Right.
And so having to work through all of that and still take care of people is really, really important. And so it's important to do, but I think what is not always understood is that it's almost as if, you're taking care of someone who had the opportunity to prevent their illness, and still yet you have to give your all in all to take care of them.
That's right.
And it's a very difficult place to be, because there are all these questions that the nursing and medical staff will have, and then there's always the whys that they got to work around and to make sure that they're giving the best care to the patient. And as a chaplain who sits in that place, I think what's really important is to listen and hear what's going on inside the person. That's why I think I go back to that whole lamenting part, because that's what we do have to make space for our staff. That we can't say that it's wrong for them to lift their hand, a fist to the sky, or to point at the patient or the family or the person and be angry, all the while making sure that they are giving the best care possible. It's a difficult place. I've never seen anything like it. 25 years of being in healthcare, I've never seen anything like it.
No, I had an opportunity to talk to some first-year medical students who are part of a Bible study that is run by an outside organization. But one of the things I said to them was, you'll be able to tell your kids and grandkids that you started medical school during a pandemic.
Yeah.
Who would have ever thought that we
Yeah.
would, with science as advanced as it
Yes.
is, none of us expected to go through this. But what you were saying about your staff continuing to care in spite of their personal feelings toward patients or families, which is going to happen with or
Right.
without a pandemic.
Right.
The high level of professionalism that we continue to see.
Yes. Has been amazing.
It has
Yeah,
been
it's
amazing.
Yeah.
It's I do not know how working a 12-hour shift,
Yeah.
these nurses and doctors, I'm friends with one of our intensivists that takes care of ICU patients in the COVID unit. It is exhausting. And the second time around, when this began to come back again, I mean, the first time I saw him, you could tell by his body language, he was just crestfallen. Like, oh, here we go again.
Yeah. You know, I mean, we both work as chaplains, and I know I'm always getting the opportunity to maybe say things to the public that medical staff may not feel comfortable in saying. From your experience, where you have served and what you have heard, what is it that you think and feel the public would need to hear?
I feel like one of the things that I just said was the professionalism that remains. People are getting the absolute highest quality care. I did, when you talked about lamenting, I had an opportunity when we had that brief window of time where we thought we were in the clear. I was able to go back to the COVID floor and sit with one of the nurses who has seen it all and done it all, and nothing scares her.
Yeah.
And she came unglued in speaking with me. It was the highest level of post-traumatic stress I've ever witnessed.
Yeah.
And she's still there.
Yeah.
She's still working. She still gives 100%.
Yeah.
So I think to the public, I would like to know that, like people to know that in spite of the grief and it's trauma, it's flat out trauma.
Yeah.
That our staff has been through, that patients are still getting quality care.
Yeah.
They're doing the absolute best they can do.
Yeah, not wanting to see people turned away. I think.
And no one is.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that I'm constantly saying to the public is that hospitals and healthcare providers and people that give care, it's a limited resource. It's not something that's just the bottomless pit, and that we have so much supply that we could reach everybody, that it is a limited resource. I think that's what I'm constantly saying to folks on behalf of our medical staff. I think the other thing that I'm always saying is that we are human, that we can be wounded, that we do get tired, that our hearts get burdened, and we do feel sadness and we get angry as much as we try to keep the professionalism in what it is that we do in our care. We're all human, and we hurt, and what I'm hoping, and what I always say to the public and those that I speak to outside of the hospital, is to do what you can to take care of yourself, so that you then take care of a nurse. If you want to take care of a nurse, take care of yourself. If you want to take care of a medical staff member, do what you need to do to take care of yourself. and not put yourself in harm's way. I think that's that's a common theme that I'm constantly sharing with people. And I think the other part that I'm always sharing with folks beyond that feeling of being hurt, or that nurses are vulnerable to the human condition, that we carry this stuff, that we cannot get through this alone, that it takes all of us to get through this together, that the virus itself doesn't care whether you're black, white, brown. It doesn't care whether your political affiliations. It doesn't care about your religious, theological beliefs. The virus only looks for the opportunity to become a host, to be able to advance the way viruses do, and I think that for medical staff, and what I'm always saying is that we cannot solve this problem alone, that it can't not be just solved by science.
Right.
And alone, but that the problem is solved by all of us working together, that it's both scientists, that it's nurses, that it is politicians, that it is business leaders, that it is the PTA mom.
That's right.
It is the teacher, it is the student in the classroom, it is all of us working together, because the virus does not differentiate in who it infects, and it just looks for a human host, and we all carry that DNA and biology, and so when it connects to us, it has the opportunity to advance. And so what's really important for us to remember in this is that solving this problem and doing this requires all of us to do this together. And can it be done? Yes, it can be, because we proved it. We proved that we've been able to do it.
That's
we
right.
did it with polio.
Yeah.
We did it with polio. And polio, now, we don't even talk about it anymore,
same
because
with
we've
smallpox.
been smallpox, same
I remember
thing.
taking the polio. I'm
Right.
old enough to where I remember taking
Right.
the polio vaccine on a sugar cube and
Yes.
lined up with all my classmates.
Yes.
But none of us got polio.
But none of us got polio. And now we don't even think about it.
No.
Because we have diminished polio and the virus to the point where the only place that it's found is in a capsule.
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's the same way with this virus. We can do that if we work together. And I really do. I think probably, as a spiritual leader in a healthcare institution, what this says to me and the way that it informs me spiritually is that there's really not much difference between me and you. And that the scriptures, for me as a Christian, is true. Love God with your whole heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as you love yourself.
That's right.
I love what Dr. Martin Luther King says. We're caught in an inescapable web of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever happens to you happens to me. So if you suffer a death prematurely from this virus, it impacts me. It impacts me emotionally in all different kinds of ways, but it also impacts me in physical ways. That I'm not left alone. I'm not left alone to my own devices and live in a silo, but it impacts me. When we think about the amount of care that we've had to give this year and last year, and the amount of care that was uncompensated, there was uncompensated care, and the amount of care that had to be paid for by the government. At some point,
Staggering.
Yeah,
Staggering
At some
number.
point, we all will have to pay
That's right.
that bill.
That's
We'll
right.
all have to pay that bill. So to think that I am outside of this because I don't, I have a theological belief, I have whatever my belief is, that I can stand alone outside of this and not be a part of this pandemic is folly. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to be a society that operates and functions the way we all are familiar with, then it means that we will have to, in some ways, pay for all of those things. If we want to see healthcare systems continue to thrive and do the things that we are accustomed to seeing and the way our healthcare operates, if we want to see all of those things do what they do, then it is really important for us to understand that we're in this together. It's not you're in this burning house and I'm out here across the street and not in danger. We're all in this together, and that's why I think that's the way this virus informs me.
You can, it's an excellent point, Caesar. You can think you've opted out and you've made your own choices, but we're in it.
Right.
And we are affected globally, and it's going to require a global solution, which means we all have to get involved.
Yeah. I think in a surprising way, it's almost as if God is saying to us, come together.
God either causes or allows all things to happen, and according to my theology, and I'm not going to even guess which one of those this is, but God, I know God is using this pandemic, and somehow it will be redeemed, but we don't know where. But He's requiring of us community and doing our part and caring for each other, and that right now that's a lot of grief and a lot of loss.
I think probably one of the biggest gifts I get from working in the hospital is that I don't get to pick my parishioners. I don't get to pick my patients. That the people that come to me come with these amazing stories and life experiences, from the person who has been homeless to the person who may be a CEO of a large corporation, that all of their lives are a gift to be celebrated and valued.
That's right.
I think, from labor and delivery, to, our cancer ward, and all of those areas, it's almost as if when you're in the hospital, you can walk from the beginning of life to the end of life in a hospital, and you don't get to pick and choose your patients.
That's right.
And they come to you with these amazing connections to family and friends. And as a chaplain, we get to see that. And, as a chaplain, what I would say, to the world and to the public is that we're in this together. And the only way that we solve this problem is that we solve this problem together.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. We didn't have time. We didn't even have time to open the package before we were hit with the second round. And I said early, a lot of us said early that the next pandemic is going to be a mental health pandemic.
Yes.
And one of the social workers in the ED stopped me in the cafeteria, and we had this conversation. She said, "Oh, it's already here."
It's here. Yes. Yeah.
This was months ago.
Yeah. The mental health pandemic is here, and it's a result of the pandemic that we're
Right.
living in.
And to speak to the being present with each other, I am reminded of in the book of Job, and the end of the second chapter where Job's friends came around him and they saw how great his grief was, and they sat with him in silence for a week. That's not something we can even think about doing today, but one of my the chaplain at the seminary where I attended, he said 80% of ministry is just showing up, and anyone can do that. Anyone can show up and listening to each other and letting each other just download without judgment, giving someone our full attention. How valued do you feel when someone is locked in on you? Nothing's distracting them. They're not looking at their phone. They're not interrupting you. They're asking kind of follow-up questions. Well, I hear you say such and such. That makes a person feel greatly valued, and it's of great worth just to come alongside someone and be physically present with them in the room and really not talking. A lot of times, my daughter told me one time, Mom, let the silence work.
Yeah, I think you know, as a chaplain, one of the things that I've learned, well, here's one of the things I know about myself, is that I can talk a lot.
But you're really good, so it's okay.
So I know that about myself. But I think what helps me to stop talking and to move away from whatever is preoccupying my mental and emotional and spiritual space is a question, tell me more. Is really asking a question, tell me more about this, or tell me more about that, whatever it is. The question is a question that comes from curiosity and an opportunity to learn. I was thinking of Eric Hoffer, philosopher. I usually do a weekly devotional for the institution where I work, the hospital where I work, and goes to all the employees. And I used Eric Hoffer's words that blessed are the learners, for they shall inherit the earth, while the learned conveniently find themselves in a world that no longer exists. And I was just thinking that this whole attitude and position to be present requires the ability to be a learner. So what is it that I need to learn about the person that I'm with, which allows me to be able to have presence? But to get to the learning part requires that I have courage and humility, because I know I'm going to hear something that may frighten me, that I'm going to learn something that may make me angry. I may hear something that may surprise me, and it all requires me to have humility, and I can't have humility if I don't have courage, and then knowing that courage is cultivated. So, I mean, when I think presence, I just think how important that is to.
And that rounds us totally back to grief. We can all be pastoral caregivers if we just have some minimal skills, and listening to someone's grief and their pain. You don't have to be a professional to do that, a chaplain or a pastor. You just have to be a friend. And just sitting alongside someone and listening, or maybe helping in practical ways. But that's going to go a long way in aiding a person who's in grief.
I was just the power of presence is something that we can all do. I mean, we can all do because our imaginations allow us to. Our imaginations allow us to share in that story, to create that image in our minds as we listen and hear the stories of others. I remember when I was a little boy, I was walking home from school and I found this little bird, fell out of its nest, and I remember, I heard this chirping, and, I walked up to it and I saw it's this vulnerable little bird, and it didn't have any feathers or anything like that. And of course I, pick it up and I'm, so excited. I got this little bird and I'm running home with it, right? Yeah. So I run home with this little bird, and I'm taking this little bird home, and I'm like, I can't believe I got this little bird, and here, I'm a third grade little boy, and I'm thinking to myself, I got all these plans for this bird, right? I'm gonna grow this bird, and I'm gonna train it to do all these tricks, and it's gonna be my best friend, and we're gonna live together forever. I had all these thoughts for this bird. So I brought it to my mom, I brought it to my mother, and I bring this bird, and I'm like, look, Mama, look what I found, and my mother's deaf. My mother's deaf, and I'm telling her in sign language. I said, "Look at this bird," and I told her, I said, "Look what I found." And she looks at it, and she's kind of surprised, and then she says, "What do you want to do with it?" And I said, "I want to build it a nest, and I want to be its mama and daddy." And my mother was like, "Okay," so we go out and we get all this stuff and make this little nest and put it in a shoebox, and then I put the little bird in there, and then I go out and find worms, because that's what I learned about how you feed birds. and so I'm there nurturing this bird and giving it little worms and all of that stuff. And then the next morning I go to bed that night, and I'm so happy that this bird is in my life. And then the next morning, I wake up and the bird died, and it's dead. And of course, this grief, for whatever reason, I bring it to my mom, wanting my mom to help me solve this problem. And my mother told me that this bird is dead. She says, "Bird's dead." And I told her, I said, "Well, why?" And she was like, "Well, because it needs its mother." And then I was telling her, I said, "But I had plans." And I'm telling her, little boy, I'm telling her about all my plans. And then she says, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." But that moment was really healing for us as we sat on the sidewalk talking about this little bird. And what was really important was that she entered into my world of imagination with all of her deafness and imagine what it was that I lost, which helped me.
Helped you?
Yeah.
Sure.
And to this day, we still remember that story.
An early lesson in grief.
Yeah, early lesson in grief, but to be present with one another. Requires courage and humility
and inner discipline.
Yeah, and inner discipline, definitely, to enter into the world of another.
An uncomfortable space. We can do it.
Yeah, I also think that the power of presence also means that we can't fix everything.
We can't fix anything.
And that is an uncomfortable place to be.
It is, and that's right.
Yeah.
Because we want to be fixers. I used to say men especially, but that's not true. I think we all want to be fixers, especially when we see a friend in pain. But that's not our job.
Yeah.
And we need to go into situations, especially when others are in grief, knowing that we can't fix anything.
Yeah.
But we can be present for them.
Yeah. For people that have lost someone, and there are folks that are out there saying, "What can I do to help?" What do you normally say?
Well, I kind of ask people not to say, "What can I do?" Because that puts the burden on the person who's in grief. say to them something practical like, I'm bringing dinner Tuesday night. Set your laundry basket out on the porch. Send me your grocery list. I'll keep your kids Wednesday night. You think of things that you can do for them and suggest them. It's easy, and it's not the wrong thing to say, please let me know what I can do. It's helpful, but it's even more helpful for us to say, to think of what we can do and then just present that to the person. That frees them of the burden of having to think of something.